This is the Radio Button Network. And this is the new Ace at Large podcast. Now, your host, Ace.
Man, I've been excited about today's Ace at Large podcast for a couple of weeks since my friend Todd, who's doing the video for the Ace at Large podcast now, told me about a guy that he met. So if you're wondering, and for some reason I'll make this announcement a couple of times here and there through the weeks as people become acquainted with the new Ace at Large podcast. The Ace at Large podcast is different. It has changed. And it all started with the death of my daughter now 4 months ago, right at 4 months ago. And Sunday, as a matter of fact, will be the 29th. Will be 4 months since she died. And the outpouring of love and support from people in this radio family and friends and everything has been overwhelming for me and has been very healing and emotionally uplifting for me and my fiance Amanda, my son Cade, even for my ex-wife Shawnette and the whole family. And I began to wonder what would happen to people, or what happens to people who don't have this type of support system that I'm blessed to have with friends, family, members of the radio family, that sort of thing. And that's what this is all about. So we're here every week sharing stories. Last week we shared our grief. Today we're going to share something that's super special, because if you think you can't, and if you think it's just too much, and if you think life has been cruel and unfair to you, and whether it has or has not doesn't matter, but you think that's a reason why you're just not ever going to be able to get yourself back on track and get your life back on track and become the person you want to be, then today is the reason you're here. You're here today for a very specific reason, because you're going to meet a man that I've been introduced to who has one of the most unbelievable stories that you will ever hear. He's been to hell and back a couple of times and has turned his life around in such a fashion that it is fascinating and interesting and, more than anything, inspiring. And he wants to do that for you and for so many other people. He is what the new Ace at Large podcast is all about. His name is Jason, and you're going to walk away from this today after hearing this edition of the Ace at Large podcast. And I firmly believe that you will believe you can make your life better starting today, because if this guy could do it, you can do it. That's why we're here, and we'll talk to him next.
There's more of the new Ace at Large podcast next. Welcome back to the new Ace at Large podcast.
So I told you just a minute ago that you're here today for a reason. I'm here today for a reason. And the reason you're here is to figure out that there's nothing you can't overcome. There's nothing that can hold you back. There's nothing that can keep you from achieving the things that you want to achieve and changing your life starting today. And the guy that we have on the phone is proof of this. You're going to meet a guy today that is awe-inspiring, because, like I said before, he's been to hell and back more than once and has turned his life around, and his goal is to let you know that you can do it also. This is Jason Mozey. Hey, Jason, thank you for being a part of the Ace at Large podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about your background, because Jason, and I say is a Marine because my understanding is once a Marine, always a Marine. And
absolutely. There's no such thing as an ex-Marine.
Yeah, so you are a Marine. You were deployed to Iraq. But let's talk about your childhood before we get into your entire story that's going to blow people's minds. What was your childhood like? What was your life like growing up as we set up your life in the Marines?
So, growing up, I always tell people it's kind of like typical 90s baby. I do come from two parents that were divorced, which is very typical coming through the 90s. And, it was kind of just that, key turn type deal where you walk home from school and, you do your thing and, parents are both working because they're divorced. And, I wasn't really into any physical activities or anything, crazy like that going through high school. The most physical activity I probably did in high school was just hacky sack. I was just that kid that was wearing Stanko jeans and listening to metal, with the chain wallet and all that.
And then what made you decide to join the Marines?
It it was September 11th. I mean, that was my generation's Pearl Harbor. I was in high school at the time, and September 11th happened, and we just watched it replay. And it was an attack on America, and it motivated me to say, I'm going to go over there and show those sons of bitches that they shouldn't have fucked with us.
And so then you join the Marines, and you are sent with your group. You're deployed in Iraq. And how long were you there?
So the first deployment that we did in 2004, we were there from February till October.
Okay. And then you came home and you went back a second time. Is that right?
Yeah, so I came home after October, and then there was a deployment to Japan in between, and then we went over a second time in 2006 into 2007.
Okay, so we've given you kind of a basic idea. What we're talking about then, no offense, Jason, an average American teenage guy in the 90s, 9/11 changes everything, you become a Marine, and you go to Iraq. And while there, your battalion lost 34 guys during the deployment. Now, is that combined of the two deployments, or is that just in one deployment?
In one. That was when we were in Ramadi in 2004.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about what happened and how that all, I know it was at different times, but can you talk a little bit about what happened there and what that was like, the experience was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of paint that picture, you're talking about, when I went into the Marines, I was 16 years old. I turned 17 while I was in boot camp, turned 18 while I was in Iraq the first time. So you have this kid whose brain isn't even developed yet, and basically we're going to war, and we're told, don't worry about much. The initial push to Baghdad's already happened, and we're going to go in there, we're going to kiss some babies, throw some money around, and we'll be out, no questions asked. And, so that was the time where we went over with no up armor on our Humvees, nothing crazy. And, to be very frank, we got our asses handed to us, right in the beginning, because we went over under-equipped. But, Marines, they adapt, they overcome. So, then we're welding steel on our Humvees, and we're putting on our own armor on these Humvees and everything like that. But still, as basically a child whose brain is still developing, all of a sudden you're taking lives and you're seeing lives taken. And one that's always stood out to me in particular was on April 4th, 2004. A buddy of mine in our platoon, Jeffrey Morris, he was 18 years old, and his life was taken. He was hit by an RPG, and, it stuck with me because you start to go through kind of this regret of the sense of, like, what could I have done? Like, I was right there, and I watched him die. What the hell could I have done for this? And, as a child, never experiencing anything even remotely close to that, it fucked me up, like, really, really bad. And and that was kind of like the start of that kind of going into that darkest period of my life.
So did you realize at the time, obviously, do you realize when you say how it messed you up and your mind starts to change? Are you aware at the time that you're changing and things are becoming dark, or are you just in the middle of it, so it just kind of happens without you being aware of what's going on?
You're in the middle of it, so you're not aware until you're taken out of that situation. So, Monday through Sunday, every day, you're at war. And so this is just what happens. People die and you take lives. Like, at the end of the day, that's all that happens. And any day you can die. And, you wake up with, like, just that mindset. And so every day that you're there, you're just like, all right, mortar can drop and I die, or I got to take someone's life, or someone's life's going to get taken. So it's pretty, as weird as this sounds, like, for me, that first time, it was like, this is normal. Like, this is just my Monday through Sunday, like, whatever. So it wasn't until, like, I come back and, a little bit in the Marines, more so when I get out of the Marines, because there's no off switch. At that time, and maybe it's changed, hopefully it has, but, like, when you're getting out of the Marines and then when you come back from war, it was basically like, hey, there's this thing called PTSD. You may have it, you may not. You should be fine. Any questions? So, like, there really isn't an off switch, and that's when you start to see kind of that you're slipping into darkness because you came back physically from the war, but mentally you're still there.
Right. Wow. So your battalion, you've lost 34 guys. Your best friend, essentially, Jeffrey, was hit by an RPG right there. How close were you to him when it happened?
Oh, maybe 100 yards, if that.
Okay. And then you finally leave Iraq. It's time to leave the Marines and start life. Now, was there a tip-off somewhere along the way for you, like, ooh, I'm going into a bad spot here? Or like you said, were you just out and you're a totally different person? Or was there ever a point that you realized this is not, like, my thought process now is different, or I'm not doing things like I used to do things. I'm a different guy, and I really don't like it. It kind of scares me. Was there ever anything that, like a tipping point to any of that?
Yeah, there was a tipping point while I was in the Marines still. When I came back the first time, it was 2005, and I was slipping deep into darkness, into depression, into all that. And I got heavy into alcohol, heavy into pills. And one night in 2005, I said, to hell with all this, and tried to take my own life. Obviously, because me and you were talking, that didn't really go as planned, which was for the better. And, they put me into a psychiatric ward and, put me on a lot more pills, medication, sleeping pills, the shebang. And I kind of just made my way through the rest of my time in the Marines with heavily drinking and heavily sedating myself with pills. And then when I got out of the Marine Corps, though, I decided, I'm not going to take these pills anymore because I don't like it, but I still stayed heavily on the sauce. And, that is when I kind of, we can get into the actual turning point, but I continued to just cover up my demons with alcohol. I was always just like trying to run away or sweep that shit under the rug through alcohol. And, so the darkest period was 2005 when I tried to take my own life because I was just like, this is it. I cannot take this anymore. I keep seeing this repeatedly over and over.
Yeah.
And, that was the time where, like I always call it, you'll hear me say it multiple times here, where that demon just kind of took control. And so that was kind of that turning point.
Okay, but let me ask you. So after you attempt to take your own life, you mentioned that you're still a Marine. They put you in the psychiatric ward. You kind of work your way through it. After that, were you? Because I've heard and talked to people before who've tried to take their own lives, and they said afterwards their thought process was like, oh, how stupid was I? I couldn't believe that I tried to take my own life. Was that your thought process, or was it just, damn, I hate that I failed at that. I'll just have to go and mask this and keep moving forward? Like, where was your mindset at? Was there regret that you had tried suicide, or was there regret that it didn't work?
The regret that I had at that time is the same thing that drives me to do half the stuff that I do now. And on the person from my platoon that had found me, I'll never forget the look on his face, and I still remember he fucking yelled out, Jesus Christ, Mozey tried to take his own life. And that sheer look of disappointment on his face, that is what stuck with me. It wasn't the fact that I failed trying to take my own life. It wasn't the fact that I thought that it was stupid I tried to do it. It was the fact that the people that I went to Iraq with, I turned my back on them. And that was when I started to really consider that side of it, in the fact of, like, your buddy died in Iraq and you're going to come back and take your own life? You're going to become a fucking statistic? You're going to become the 22? No. And so that is what stuck in my head.
And we're going to explain what the 22 is coming up in a second as we go through Jason's story a little bit more. So you get out of the Marines, you come home, you're still heavily sedating yourself with alcohol. And did anyone say anything to you, mom, dad, friends, family? Did anybody say, hey, man, are you okay? You seem to be drinking a lot. Was it obvious, or were you covering it up somewhat? Because I know my dad was an alcoholic, and when he thought a lot of times he was covering it up, he was doing a terrible job of covering it up. And I would have to stop and go, hey, clearly you're drinking and you're not supposed to be. What was that experience like? Did anybody pick up on it, or were you able to kind of keep it hidden?
No, I mean, I didn't keep it hidden at all. And, you know, that's kind of the thing about it. And I talk about it a little bit now, where it's like, it was okay because everybody looked at it as, you went to war, you deserve this. Like, you deserve to be able to drink. You know, it's okay. So I never had to hide it because everyone just was like, yeah, you can drink. Like,
because of what you'd been through, they understood. So it makes total sense. It'll be fine. Have some drinks. It's totally good. He needs that release because of the stress of having been in war and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then where was the point? You're home from the Marines. Obviously, you're still drinking and things are not going well for you. What was the thing? Were you trying to work through it? Were you were you checking into PTSD? You mentioned that they kind of mentioned it to you and you're going about your way. Were you going through therapy? Were you trying to stop the alcohol? What was your mindset as you began to progress through this once you were home?
So I started to go to therapy, and I had really bad experiences with a lot of different therapists, you know, and anybody that goes to therapy, you know, I always say that you may get some good, some bad. I mean, look, we're just human beings. There's some good, there's some bad out there. And I did find somebody that I did connect with, so I continued to go to therapy, and, you know, working through some stuff. And I was, you know, looking back on it, it was basically me going through the motions. I was kind of just telling him what he wanted, and nothing was really sinking in. And, you know, it was in 2014, I think it was. A buddy of mine had said, hey, there's this obstacle course race called Tough Mudder. Why don't we go run it? It's a 10-mile obstacle course, 20 or 22 obstacles in it. And I was like, sure, what the hell, you know? And the course beat the ever-living shit out of me. But like, when I crossed that finish line, I kind of like felt this spark. I can't really explain exactly what it was at that point, but it was like, it was that sense of accomplishment. It was that sense of community. It was something. It was kind of that thing that I just needed. And so I was like, okay, all right, so we're going to build off this. And that's where the real turn started for me.
That's fascinating. It just took the completion of that one race, which is obviously quite an accomplishment in and of itself. But that's the thing that made you suddenly feel like, hang on a second, I could be doing this better, this being life. I could be doing more and living a better life, all because of that one little sense of accomplishment that you had.
Yeah, and it was because of that is when, like, it started that mindset that I have now of saying to myself, like, I go into the mirror and I look and I say, look, everything that has happened to you may have been out of your control. You know, you may have joined the Marines, but like, everything else is out of your control. Now, granted, you know, you may have not done, and there was nothing that you may have been able to do to change what has happened. But here's the thing. This is the demon that now lives in your head. And what are you going to do about it? Are you going to allow him to take control of your life? Or are you going to make that motherfucker pay rent every goddamn day for setting up shop? And the rent that is due every day for him is going to be hard work. Because I started to understand that, like, after that initial Tough Mudder, like, that euphoric feeling at the end, okay, I made him pay rent. Like, I went through this, and this is the rent that is due every day for him. And then that was kind of that start. That was that kind of first step into what I do now.
That's great. I want you to talk about that one more time, because I think that's so important to other people who may have experienced the same type of feelings that you have with, you know, the depression, the PTSD, heavy drinking, alcoholism, is that there was a moment there where you recognized, okay, this is the demon. And that bit of recognition allowed you to kind of clear up how you wanted your life to go. Is what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Would that be how you would describe it? The recognition of the demon, whatever that demon was in your life, you recognized this is the thing that's driving me in the wrong way. Now I've got to find a way to make this thing drive me in the right way. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's that and the fact of not pointing externally to everything else to try to fix something, like to fix that demon.
Yes.
You know, in my mind, I say to myself, like, this is now you. So how do you work with this? Like you may have not put that demon in your head, but he is there. And so what are you going to do about it?
And then this totally transformed your life. Now, here's the one thing that I'm honestly not sure of about your story. When you began after this Tough Mudder, you're about to have your mind blown at the stuff that Jason has accomplished with these extreme races. But did you stop drinking altogether, or did you just realize, I got to get this whole thing under control and get my life together here?
No, so, I mean, it was, okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to get in shape, and we're going to, like, try to work through this. And so, you know, I enjoyed the intensity of, like, the obstacle course race and everything like that. And I was like, okay, so we're going to get into intense workouts. And so the first thing I went to was a at-home DVD called Insanity, because, like, I see the commercials, you know, you got Sean T on there, he's jumping around, everything looks crazy intense, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be my jam. And go through the 60 days, and everything's going good, everything's great, finish the 60 days, and then I celebrate with booze, because why not, like, type mentality.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, you know, I go back to the drinking, and what turns from celebration just continues on into the same old habit. And it really, I think it was coming up on a year after that, where, like, the next Tough Mudder was coming up, and it was like, dude, you guys get your shit together. Like, remember what we did last year, and you know, what we're going to do again. And so, again, it kind of just replayed the DVD, got into the 60 days, did the Tough Mudder, and it was like, all right, you know what? Like, we have to kind of fix our shit. And, like, if you want to not flip back to where you were in 2005, this isn't a yearly thing. This isn't I'm going to do this for 60 days, do a Tough Mudder, and then for the other 10 months out of the year, we're just going to be a complete shit show. Like, we're going to need to do this every day, because, like I said, that demon is going to stay there, and that bitch needs to pay rent every day. So what we're going to do is we're going to wake up at 3 a.m., and we're going to work out. And that is where kind of it started, and then it progressed.
But what's so great about that, and the thing that I hope people take from this, is that, okay, so you come back after this extremely traumatic situation, you're having a terrible time, you find something that works, it works, you go through the process for 2 months, then you celebrated and stumbled. And it took you months to get yourself back motivated again. But the point being is, even though you stumbled, it didn't mean it kept you down. You eventually found your way back to, okay, hang on a second, I'm going to do this again, but this time I got to do it a little bit differently. So you learn from your mistakes. I think a lot of times with my father, with his alcoholism, he would stumble and fall when he was trying to stop drinking or going through a program or whatever. And then he was like, well, I'm just an alcoholic. I give up now. I'm just an alcoholic. But it was like, no, even though you stumbled, Jason, you stumbled and fell, you picked yourself back up and then recognize the changes that you need to make to be successful past 2 months, past one Tough Mudder, to the, you know, to change your life in general. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
And so then you became, there's a part of me in reading your story and in talking to people about your story that obviously there's an obsessive gene in you somewhere. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. I mean, with half the stuff I do, I would definitely agree with you that, you know, that obsession, maybe it is for alcohol because it does run in my family.
Yep.
Maybe that just transitions over into, you know, what I do now.
Well, explain what you do now, because Jason has done so many different things. You just finished a 100-mile race. You've done the death race. Can you explain what the death race is?
Yeah, so the death race is a race that is what Spartan races actually came out of. And so it's in Pittsfield, Vermont, and it's, 72-ish. There's not really a hard number there. It's like 72-ish hours of just getting your nuts stomped in. No sleep. Maybe you get like a 10-second trail nap every now and again. But like it's just like splitting wood, carrying logs, sitting in a ice cold pond for forever, and coming out and doing very like crazy menial tasks, whether it's like cutting grass with scissors or planting seeds with toothpicks, and then like going to grab a rock and carrying it up a mountain or whatever the case may be. It's just basically getting your nuts stomped in for 72 hours.
So there's that. There's the death race. There's the 100-miler. You just attempted a 274, is this right, mile trail from Vermont to Canada, and there was no contest. This was just something you decided, I'm going to go do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, with everything going on in COVID and everything, and all these races getting, canceled and everything, I'm not just going to sit there and be like, hey, there's nothing I can do, boo-hoo me. No, because that demon still needs to pay rent, so we need to put in some work. So what are we going to do? And you got the long trail that runs from Canada to Mass. It's 273 miles and 60,000 feet of elevation gain to the ridge of the Green Mountains in Vermont. And so I said, well, fuck it. I'll just, run end to end and see how quick I can do it.
Here's the beautiful thing. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the thing that jumps out at me that I want the people that are listening to the Ace at Large podcast right now to understand is, again, there was an obstacle in your way. The obstacle was COVID, so it changed. There's no races. You don't have anything to train for. But rather than say, well, I'll just sit around and I'll just hang out and take some time off or whatever until COVID, you know how you work. You know that you need for this demon to pay rent, and that's what kind of keeps you sane and keeps you healthy and keeps you on the right path. So you found something to go out and do. Now, I'm not saying everybody should go out and run 274 miles, but my point is you didn't allow there to be an excuse that was dropped in. You found a way, even in trying times, to make it work for you, and that's the point. Don't just accept the situation. Find a way to work around the situation and keep yourself on the right track and keep yourself moving in a positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do a lot of work with a nonprofit up here in Vermont that helps veterans with PTSD. And so, along with me running the long trail, I put out a virtual race for people to kind of do it alongside with me wherever they are. And they could ruck it, they can run it, they can do whatever. And so, I go out in September, which is Suicide Awareness Month, and, we get after it. It come to find out, I get, Rick, I think it was like 80 or 100 miles into it, and coming down off one of the mountains, I partially tore my meniscus. So, that is what it is, and wasn't able to finish this round. But, that's my pilgrimage every year, is doing the long trail in September. So, again, like you had brought up earlier in the story, you stumble, and the biggest thing is, do you stay down or do you get up? That's like saying Mike Tyson never got hit in the face. No, he gets hit in the face all the fucking time, but he doesn't just sit down and cry either.
Right.
He gets up and he gives another shot to his opponent. And so, okay, partial tear in the meniscus, good to go. We're going to heal this up, and we're going to get after it.
And every time that Jason runs a race, he wears a T-shirt that says, I run for the 22 guys we lost. Talk about the 22 and explain how important that is to you.
So for anybody that may not know, I mean, statistically speaking, there's 22 veterans that take their lives every day. And so you see a lot of people, they do, push-ups for the 22. They do, a lot of different things for the 22. And there's a lot of talk about, let's get this number down to 0. So that is that's always been my goal is, just to help, on my deathbed, it was one person. I saved one person from taking their own life. Totally worth it. Totally worth all the pain. Totally worth all the lack of sleep and everything to be the change I want in the world. And so that is what the big thing is for me. And, through a lot of different things, whether it's the 100-milers, whether it's the 200-miler I ran, the record attempt for burpees in 12 hours, I've had people reach out to me and say, you're such an inspiration. You've helped me get through this. You helped me get through that. And, you know, that is what it's all about for me. It's being that light that I couldn't find during my darkest time.
I love
And
that.
when I'm in my darkest time, becoming the light instead of searching for it.
That's great. That's over, by the way, I did the math. That's over 8,000 veterans commit suicide every year at a rate of 22 a day, 365 days a year, which is an astonishing number that something has got to be done about. So,
and you know, I just want to add, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
But, you know, I just wanted to add, too, is that, like, and I don't just kind of look at this as a veteran-only issue. I look at it as a holistic issue, is in saying that, okay, that is a stupid number of amount of people that take their own lives who are veterans. But I look more so at, you know, the mental, whether they're disorders, whether they're illnesses, or whether just somebody's having a shit day. And, you know, I look at all of it. And I've, you know, spoken with people who have, you know, been molested, who've been raped, who have, you know, been through traumatic experiences such as car accidents, fires, death, you know, everything. And it's just kind of like this holistic, you know, issue of, you know, we as human beings get depressed, and we as human beings have these mental things that we struggle with and deal with. So yes, like 22 veterans a day take their own lives, but especially during this time with COVID and lockdown, and there is no connection, no physical connection with people. Suicides are up, depression is up, and I'm not going to stand for it. So I'm going to do what I can to help whoever out there is having an issue, not just veterans, not just anyone. Like, and no one has to say a word. Just nod and let's get after it. Throw on your shoes, come join me on a run, like, or whatever the case may be.
Obviously, I hope people have reached out to you and given you a sense of how inspiring you are with your story to them. I just had a couple questions as we wrap up. You mentioned when you tried to commit suicide, the soldier that found you, your buddy that found you from your battalion, and you still see his face to this day, if I understood what you were saying correctly. Do you still have contact with him?
I do. We are very good friends, and, you know, we've had a conversation kind of about that night, and, you know, we stay connected a lot. And, yeah. But what I was saying in that sense is, like, when I think of, like, because if we were going to be honest, like, whether it's, you know, during the middle of one of those insanity workouts, whether it's, you know, on my first 5K, the 100-miler, everything I've ever done, the death race, 200-miler, I do think of quitting because I'm a normal fucking person. But that is where that kind of comes in, where it's like, you know, who are you letting down? Do you remember that time you let, you know, do you remember that face that he made, that show of disappointment? And it's like, no, we don't fucking do that now. What we do is we continue on. So I don't give a shit if you're going an inch, because that inch becomes a mile, or a foot, that foot becomes a mile, that mile becomes 100. As long as you continue forward momentum, you are going forward.
And one last thing that I'm curious about, and I hope this is okay to ask, but I was shown a picture. Yep. I was shown a picture of you at. You mentioned your best friend Jeffrey, who died. You were, you know, right there within 100 yards of him in Iraq. But you just were able to visit his grave in the last year or two. Is that right?
Yeah, that was probably 2 years ago now.
Okay, so from 2004 to 2018, if you don't mind my asking, what was it about that was it something you had to overcome? Was that just too difficult until recently for you to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I couldn't go there. You know, there was kind of this lingering thing over my head to say that, you know, if you were just looking down that alley at that right time, he'd be alive. And it's because of you he's dead. And that may sound harsh, but that's just where my mind was. And I wasn't willing to face that. And again, it's one of those things where you look into the mirror and you have to answer those hard goddamn questions like that and say, he's dead. And there may have been something you could do about it, or there may have not been something you can do about it. But at the end of the day, he's dead. And so, what are you going to do to persevere and live on for his name? Like, because being this depressed alcoholic, sitting in the dark, bitch about everything is not doing any justice for him.
That's a great way to phrase it. Yeah. Doing all of the things you were doing doesn't do anything to help anybody, much less him and his life and legacy. I appreciate so much how open and honest you are about what you've been through and your experiences and where you were in life and where you are now. When I know you talk to groups, you spend a lot of time with a lot of people. It's an extremely inspiring story. Is there anything for people who might be listening who just find themselves right now in a tough spot? Are there is there a final thought or something you would like to share with them from your experiences?
If you find yourself in that tough area, that tough spot, you think that you can't go on or anything, like that, there are always resources out there. And, whether it's, if you're a veteran, there's the VA. If you're not, there are multiple other avenues that you can take. But the biggest thing that, worked for me was reevaluating what my aspect of life was and what my aspect of my issues were. And, for me, I always tell people, I'm not saying that everybody's going to run 100 miles and they're going to be, floating on cloud nine and all their issues are going to go away. What I am going to say, though, is that I found that when you go all in on what you love in life, then everything starts to fall into place. And when you start to put meaning to what you're doing, everything starts to fall into place. And, it's hard work. And, you just have to continuously move forward. Just because you got knocked down does not mean you can't get up and go. When I told people that I did the record attempts for the most chest to ground burpees in 12 hours, I say it was simple, because all it was falling down and getting up 3,194 times. And that is that correlates to just what you asked me. You will fall and you get back up and you keep going forward, and you fall and you get back up and you keep going forward. Never allow yourself to get into that moment. That moment of darkness is just a moment. The sun always comes up. The next day always comes. And so whether it's getting to the next foot, the next inch, or even the next breath, just live till the next breath.
There you go. Jason, thank you for taking the time to talk to us and spend some time on the Ace at Large podcast. It's an unbelievably inspiring story and a story that more people need to hear. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Take care. It's Jason Mozey.
Yep.
We'll have more coming up in a second on the Ace at Large podcast. Hang on.
There's more of the new Ace at Large podcast next. Welcome back to the new Ace at Large podcast.
I don't know if you're not feeling inspired or a little bit better about your situation now. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that's a guy that had 34 friends, including his best friend, die in Iraq. Alcoholic, pills, attempted suicide, and found a way to change his life into something unbelievably positive that is affecting the lives of thousands of people around the country, around the world with his story. But it goes back to the same thing. I love the thing that he said about when he identified his demon. That was one of the best things I've ever heard, the best ways I've ever heard that described. He identified the demon. He identified the thing that was holding him back. He identified the thing that was preventing him from progressing in life the way he wanted to. Then he completely took ownership of it. And then he found a way to channel that same negative energy into something positive that he loved. And even when he failed, he continued every day. I go back to my mom to put one foot in front of the other every single day. Like he said, one more breath, one more second, one more minute, one more hour, one more day, and things began to get better for him. And now, hopefully, he's inspired you today on the Ace at Large podcast. If anything ever comes up, hit me up on social media at Ace at Large. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your feedback. Twitter, Instagram, at Ace at Large. On Facebook, it's David Ace Cannon. I hope that you'll take a minute to drop a line and let me know your thoughts, whether it's Jason or what you're experiencing in life. There will be no Ace at Large podcast next week. We're off for Thanksgiving. But I will say this much. Please take advantage of that day, because it's a day built around giving thanks. Take stock in all that there is around you. And if you really get down and look at it, you'll find there's plenty in life to be thankful for, and plenty in life to give you reason to pause and want to keep moving forward and turn your life around and push those old terrible thoughts out of the way. Really hope you enjoyed, Jason. I would love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
This is the new Ace at Large podcast. The new Ace at Large podcast will be back next Thursday.